In the small town of Ashford, nestled among the hills of Virginia, life flowed gently and peacefully. Everyone knew each other, and the local church, St. Mark's, located at the center of town, was not just a place of worship, but the very heart of the community. This was where Ashford's residents came to find solace, share their joys, or simply listen to the kind words of Father Daniel McKinnon, a priest who had served the town for over a decade. Father Daniel was a man sought out for advice, and his words often held weight in both spiritual and worldly matters. However, his unwavering perspective on life and his belief in his own infallibility would soon become the center of a terrible scandal that shook Ashford to its core. Maria Grayson, a 30-year-old woman with a heart of gold, was one of the church's most devoted members. Everyone in town knew her, from the children for whom she organized Sunday school classes to the elderly whom she assisted in their homes. Maria was the rare kind of person who always made time for others, often neglecting her own needs. Her bright smile and kind eyes had become a symbol of goodness in the small town. But no one could have imagined that it would be within the walls of this church, steeped in prayers and hopes, where an event would occur that would make everyone question what they knew about life and death, good and evil. One day, in the early days of a cold October, Maria disappeared without warning. She was absent from Sunday services and from the town park where she often strolled with neighborhood children. Phone calls went unanswered, and her home appeared to have been abandoned in a hurry. This alarmed the residents, and within days, a search began. No one expected that Maria would be found dead, much less in the most sacred place in town. But this was only the beginning, the start of a long and painful story that would reveal the darker sides of the human soul and force Ashford to confront a truth it could no longer hide, even behind the church's walls. It all began with her body, discovered in a silent, dark parish hall. Maria Grayson's death was not only a tragedy, it was a brutal murder, carried out with such cold determination that no one could believe the man they trusted with their deepest secrets was behind it. The investigation into the crime was destined to destroy trust and shatter lives. But until the truth came to light, the residents of Ashford still believed that evil could not penetrate their quiet haven. However, with each passing hour and every new discovery by the detectives, it became evident that true evil could hide even in the most righteous hearts. Thus began a story that shook the town to its very core. Soon, all of Ashford's residents realized that no one is safe from the darkness lurking behind the mask of holiness. A cold autumn wind swept through the streets of Ashford, pulling the last leaves from the trees. It seemed like any ordinary day, a bustling marketplace, children playing in the schoolyard, and the sound of church bells echoing through empty alleys. But something was amiss. There was a tension in the air, subtle yet persistent, as if nature itself was warning of impending disaster. In the early hours of the morning, as the town slowly came to life, Lisa Carter timidly knocked on the door of St. Mark's Church. She was there, as she was every Sunday, to help Father Daniel prepare the church for the service. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more intriguing mysteries like this one, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated and never miss our next captivating tale. Your support helps us bring you even more stories, so hit that like button and join our community today. At that hour, Maria would usually already be there, tending to the flowers or arranging the candles. But today, the church greeted Lisa with silence, a strange, muffled silence that spread across the empty pews and dimmed the light streaming through the stained glass windows. Lisa called out for Maria, her voice echoing through the vacant hall, but there was no response. At first, she thought her friend might simply be running late. However, a faint anxiety began to grow, slowly transforming into fear. Her intuition told her that something was not right. This feeling lingered as she walked through the dark aisles of the church, heading toward the rooms where the priest and parishioners often held private conversations. It was there, in a small room closed off to the public, that Lisa discovered something that would change her life forever. The dim light from a lamp, barely filtering through the partially open door, revealed a horrifying scene. Amid the darkness, on the floor scattered with books and papers, lay Maria Grayson's body. At first, Lisa couldn't fully grasp what she was seeing. It was too unexpected, too unimaginable. Maria's body was mutilated beyond recognition. Lisa's first reaction wasn't fear, but an inexplicable sense of emptiness, as if reality had suddenly lost all meaning. She screamed, but her cry was swallowed by the church's walls. Time seemed to stand still. The idea that her friend was dead did not immediately register in Lisa's mind. In that moment, she couldn't comprehend how or who could have committed such an atrocity. Maria's body bore bloody marks, and her face was so disfigured it was only recognizable by her clothing and jewelry. But the horror didn't end there. Behind Maria's body, slightly to the side, lay a blood-stained cross. It was a chilling symbol that the church, a place they had always considered a sanctuary, had now become the site of a murder. This wasn't just an act of violence. It was a dark, ruthless message delivered to the very heart of faith and trust. Soon, the police arrived. Their heavy footsteps echoed through the halls as they examined the body and the crime scene. But their initial findings raised more questions than answers. Who could have committed such a brutal crime in a place that was supposed to be sacred? And why Maria? Allison Harper, a detective known for her sharp intellect and professionalism, took charge of the case, knowing it would likely be one of the toughest of her career. From the outset, Allison noticed several oddities. For one, the crime scene was eerily clean, despite the brutality of the murder. There were no signs of a struggle, which was unusual given the state of Maria's body. Furthermore, her personal belongings were untouched, ruling out robbery as a motive. Everything pointed to the killer being someone Maria knew, someone who acted with cold, calculated precision. As the forensics team collected evidence, Allison began analyzing possible motives. This murder didn't appear random. It seemed carefully planned and symbolic, as though the killer wanted to convey a specific message. But what exactly were they trying to say? The town was in shock after news of the brutal murder spread. The residents couldn't believe something so horrific could happen in their quiet community, where people left their doors unlocked and greeted each other with smiles. The church, once a beacon of light, was now shrouded in fear and suspicion. Allison knew uncovering the truth would not be easy. This murder seemed to be just the beginning, the catalyst that would expose the dark secrets hidden behind Ashford's facade of decency and faith. She was ready to delve into the darkness and find answers to the questions now haunting the entire town. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the dense clouds, Ashford awoke to a completely different reality. Maria Greison's murder was a blow that echoed through every home and family in the town. Rumors spread like wildfire, with each resident claiming to know more than the next and adding their own twist to the story. But amid all the gossip and speculation, one question loomed above the rest. Who could have committed such a terrible crime? For detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway, that morning was like no other, overshadowed by the horrific events of the day before. Allison, having barely closed her eyes after a sleepless night, sat in her office poring over forensic reports, searching for any detail that might shed light on the case. Mark, though outwardly calm, felt the tension that had gripped the town. In Ashford, where both detectives had worked for over a year, murders were so rare that every case became a major event. But this one was extraordinary. The first thing that caught Allison's attention in the reports was the lack of signs of a struggle, suggesting Maria had either trusted her killer or had been taken by surprise. Yet what shocked her most was the state of the body. It was clear that the truth behind this crime would unravel a web of darkness that no one in Ashford could have imagined. The injuries inflicted on Maria indicated a crime committed with particular cruelty. Forensic investigators discovered that the murder weapon, a knife, had been left at the crime scene, an unusual detail since most killers try to dispose of the weapon to complicate the investigation. But this criminal seemed intent on sending a message, and that was what disturbed Allison the most. Mark, on the other hand, was gathering information about Maria's life. At first glance, it appeared flawless: a loving family, active participation in the town's life, and devotion to the church. Yet Mark knew that behind the facade of perfection, there were often secrets that could shed light on the real motives. He began by questioning her family, friends, and acquaintances to piece together a complete portrait of her life in the days leading up to her death. Many described Maria as kind and supportive, but some hinted at her growing withdrawal and anxiety, which she seemed to hide from everyone. Mark's first interview led him to Lisa Carter, Maria's friend who had discovered her body. Lisa was in shock and still struggling to process what had happened. However, through her emotions, she told Mark that in the past few weeks, Maria had become more reserved, often lost in thought, and even avoided discussing church matters, which had once been her favorite topic. Lisa also mentioned that Maria had begun going to the church alone at night when no one else was there, clearly troubled by something she never shared. Meanwhile, Allison focused on the crime scene itself, knowing the key to solving the case might lie in seemingly insignificant details. Father Daniel McKinnon offered to assist with the inspection, and while his help seemed well-intentioned, something about his demeanor struck Allison as unnatural. The priest was unusually calm for someone who had personally known the victim and seen her body in such a horrific state. This caught Allison's attention, and she decided to observe him more closely. Father Daniel was a complex figure, strict but fair. While his faith was unquestionable, there were moments in his sermons that had alarmed some parishioners. A staunch adherent to religious rules, his rigidity could sometimes be intimidating. Allison decided it was worth delving into his past to see if anything in his life could shed light on the current investigation. Among the documents Allison reviewed were books and church records, but one stood out: Maria's personal journal. This diary was not just a collection of her thoughts, but also a testimony to her experiences in the weeks leading up to her death. It contained notes about her doubts, inner turmoil, and fears. One of the final entries mentioned a man in the dark who watched her, even in the church, which alarmed Allison further. At the same time, Mark discovered that Father Daniel was the only person who had not provided a clear alibi for the night of the murder. He claimed he was in the church praying, but no one could confirm his statement, deepening the suspicions against him. However, there was still no direct evidence. Allison and Mark began to realize that their investigation was only just beginning and that many secrets remained hidden. The pivotal moment came with the understanding that behind Ashford's peaceful facade lay many buried skeletons, and that Maria's murder might be just the tip of the iceberg. Each step, each new piece of evidence, brought more questions. And though answers were still elusive, the detectives were determined to uncover the truth. The foggy morning found Ashford steeped in a simmering anxiety. Maria Grayson's murder had become the main topic of conversation in the streets, shops, and homes. In a town where the priest was the emblem of moral principles and spiritual guidance, doubts were now surfacing. Whispers began to circulate. Perhaps there was something dark and terrible hidden behind Father Daniel McKinnon's facade of piety. The priest's behavior following the murder was raising even more questions. Even those who had once considered him a steadfast and trustworthy leader started to notice changes. He became more withdrawn, avoided communication, and seemed increasingly lost in his thoughts. Detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway began to scrutinize the priest's past, knowing that behind every mask there could be something that explained current events. Their investigation into his life led to startling discoveries. Daniel McKinnon was born and raised in a devoutly religious family. From a young age, he was groomed for a life of service in the church and taught to adhere unwaveringly to religious doctrines. His parents, individuals of iron will and uncompromising convictions, instilled in him strict moral principles that guided his life. Yet the deeper the detectives dug into his past, the more details emerged that contradicted his pristine image. Mark uncovered information that Daniel had served in another diocese for several years before being assigned to Ashford. During his time in that previous parish, things hadn't always gone smoothly. Several parishioners had complained about his excessive strictness and harsh methods in teaching children at the church school. One of these complaints even led to an investigation, but the matter was quietly dismissed, and Daniel was simply transferred to another parish. Meanwhile, Allison began analyzing his behavior over the past few months. What caught her attention was that several people who had once been close to Daniel had gradually distanced themselves from him. She spoke with Amelia Ross, the church secretary, who knew the priest better than most. Amelia was a devout supporter of the church and had always stood by Daniel. However, she mentioned that recently he had become more reserved and irritable. Amelia also recalled overhearing strange conversations between Daniel and Maria. These exchanges, she said, were intense, though she couldn't discern their content. Allison and Mark further discovered that Daniel was the last person to see Maria alive in the church on the day of her death. He claimed they had discussed church matters and that Maria seemed a little troubled, but that their conversation ended there. However, Daniel's timeline didn't match up with the sequence of events. Several witnesses reported seeing him leave the church much later than he claimed. This inconsistency heightened Allison's suspicion that Daniel might not be who he presented himself to be. As Allison delved deeper, she realized Daniel's connection to Maria was more complex than a mere priest-parishioner relationship. In Maria's journal, which Allison had found earlier, there were repeated references to a man in black who frequently approached Maria at the church, trying to convince her of something. These notes became increasingly alarming as the day of her death approached. In one of her final entries, Maria wrote that she felt trapped and didn't know how to escape the situation. Despite these ominous clues, there was still no direct evidence implicating Daniel. His alibi, while dubious, hadn't been conclusively refuted. But Allison and Mark knew they needed to dig deeper. The question was not only who killed Maria, but also why it happened. What did Maria know that might have driven Daniel, or someone close to him, to commit such a heinous crime? In the meantime, the residents of Ashford began to suspect that the situation was more complicated than it seemed. More and more people started to distance themselves from the church, feeling their faith had been shaken. This wasn't just a crisis of belief. It was the dawning realization that the man they trusted as a spiritual guide might be hiding a terrible secret. Suspicion and fear began to eat away at the town's calm, turning what was once a peaceful community into a place where anyone could become a suspect. Allison and Mark decided to focus on evidence to avoid making any hasty errors. They understood that they might be dealing with someone adept at concealing their true intentions, but they also knew that the truth always comes to light. They were determined to uncover what had really happened on that fateful day when Maria Greason was murdered. As the detectives delved deeper into the case, the atmosphere in Ashford grew increasingly tense. Each day, the once peaceful town seemed enveloped in a fog of suspicion and mistrust. Maria Greason's murder and the mounting suspicions surrounding Father Daniel McKinney had transformed the community into a hotbed of speculation and doubt. Conversations often began as innocent questions, but quickly escalated into heated arguments and eventually outright accusations. At a local cafe where residents gathered to discuss the latest news, the murder had become the sole topic of discussion. Some recalled seeing Maria near the church late at night, while others pointed out strange changes in Father Daniel's behavior. Every detail seemed important, no matter how small, and everyone felt compelled to share anything that might shed light on the crime. One of the most debated topics was the relationship between Maria and Father Daniel. Many knew that Maria spent a great deal of time at the church, often helping to organize events, and that she was close to the priest. But now, after her murder, that closeness began to seem suspicious. People started wondering what had truly connected them. Was it purely spiritual, or was there something more? Amelia Ross, the church secretary, was also drawn into this whirlwind of rumors. As the only person who worked closely with Father Daniel daily, villagers began to suspect that she might know something but was staying silent. Some even speculated that she might have been involved in the murder, as she was always nearby and privy to the inner workings of the parish. Realizing that the rumors were not only fueling public interest in the case, but also complicating the investigation, Allison and Mark decided to hold a series of meetings with local residents. Their goal was not only to gather more information, but also to try to ease the growing tension within the community. However, Allison and Mark soon realized that stopping the flow of rumors wouldn't be easy. During one of their community meetings, they encountered John Miller, a local journalist who had been closely following the investigation. John seemed unusually well informed about the detectives' movements and eagerly shared his theories with anyone who would listen. He was convinced that the case went beyond jealousy or personal disputes, and even suggested that the murder might be linked to dark rituals or ancient rites, supposedly performed in secret by the priest. Although Allison was skeptical of John's claims, she recognized that he might have access to valuable information, especially if he had been speaking with individuals too afraid to approach the police directly. She decided to note some of his theories, though she didn't consider them critical at the time. Meanwhile, Mark focused on questioning parish members. He noticed a growing trend. Many who had once supported Father Daniel were now beginning to distance themselves from him. Some parishioners admitted feeling uneasy during his recent sermons, especially when he spoke about sin and redemption with an intensity that bordered on threatening. These sermons, which had once inspired trust, now felt ominous, as if they carried a veiled warning. This unease left parishioners questioning whether they had misjudged the man they once revered. Most startling was that even the priest's most devout followers began doubting their faith. They struggled to reconcile how someone they trusted with their souls could possibly be involved in such a heinous crime. These doubts struck at the core of their beliefs, shaking the very foundations upon which they had built their lives. At the same time, Lisa Carter, Maria's friend, remained one of the few who still believed in Father Daniel's innocence. Her unwavering support for the priest made her a target of her neighbors' judgment. To those who had already condemned Daniel, Lisa's faith in him seemed absurd, even suspicious. She began to feel the cold distance of people she had once considered friends. Her loyalty to the priest started to raise questions, casting doubt on her motives and drawing even more suspicion her way. Allison and Mark realized the situation was spiraling out of control. The rising tension in the town threatened to lead to unpredictable consequences, so they decided to accelerate the investigation to prevent further discord. They meticulously re-examined every detail, every piece of evidence, searching for something that might finally lead them to the true killer. But answers remained elusive, and suspicion continued to grow. In the shadows of the once tranquil town, fears stirred, and new mysteries emerged. Every step the detectives took seemed to bring them closer to a solution, but also uncovered new questions. The investigation entered a critical phase where each piece of evidence only complicated the case further, rather than clarifying it. Allison and Mark felt they were on the brink of a breakthrough, but the deeper they delved, the more they realized just how intricate and layered this case truly was. One of the initial challenges was the inconsistency in witness testimonies. Some residents claimed to have seen Maria and Father Daniel together the night before her death, while others insisted that the priest had already left the church by the time Maria arrived. Allison understood that people could misremember details, but the sheer number of discrepancies was concerning. Mark decided to return to the beginning of the investigation and re-examine the evidence collected at the crime scene. He noticed several details that had initially been overlooked. In particular, he was struck by the fingerprints found on the knives and the blood-stained cross used in the murder. Initially, it was assumed that all the prints belonged to Maria and Father Daniel. However, upon closer examination, it was discovered that there were also fingerprints from another individual. These fingerprints didn't match any of the known suspects, suggesting that another person might have been at the crime scene. This revelation cast doubt on the theory that the priest acted alone and raised the possibility of a collaborator, or even that someone else entirely was the real killer. Meanwhile, Allison decided to revisit Father Daniel's alibi. She spoke with parishioners who claimed to have seen him on the day of the murder. Under pressure, one of the witnesses, an elderly man named Henry Wallace, finally admitted he wasn't sure if he had actually seen the priest that night. His initial statement had been influenced by other parishioners who didn't want to believe in Father Daniel's potential guilt. This admission further weakened the priest's position. The situation grew even more complex when Mark uncovered a previously unknown diary belonging to Maria. It had been hidden in a compartment beneath her bed. and its contents were shocking. In the diary, Maria detailed her experiences and fears regarding Father Daniel. She wrote that he often approached her with proposals she found strange, even threatening. In one of her final entries, Maria mentioned that she planned to tell someone about these proposals, but didn't specify what they were. Allison and Mark began to realize that Maria might have been keeping a secret that placed her in danger. However, the diary also referenced a third person who, according to Maria, knew of her plans and was trying to stop her. This added yet another layer of complexity, as it was unclear whom Maria trusted and who might have been an ally or an enemy. As the investigation deepened, the detectives turned their attention to the church's financial records. These revealed large sums of money flowing through the church's accounts in recent months, with no clear origin. The money had been transferred to Father Daniel's personal account, but there was no documentation of how it was spent. This discovery led Allison and Mark to consider motives beyond personal relationships, such as financial interests. Further digging revealed that Father Daniel had previously been involved in controversial real estate transactions involving church-owned land. While this could explain the source of the money, it didn't clarify how it connected to Maria's murder. Every new piece of evidence only added more questions. The case was becoming increasingly complex, and Allison and Mark realized they needed to find a connection between these seemingly unrelated facts. They began to suspect that something much larger might be at play, perhaps a conspiracy involving multiple people, each with their own motives tied to Maria's death. This realization pushed the detectives to dig deeper, knowing that the truth could reveal a web of deceit and ambition far more extensive than they had initially imagined. Meanwhile, anxiety in the town continued to grow. People no longer knew whom to trust. Every new discovery and suspicion fueled the fire of fear. The once united and friendly community began to fragment into groups, each with its own theories and suspicions. Allison and Mark knew time was working against them. They needed answers quickly before the situation spiraled completely out of control. However, the deeper they delved into the investigation, the clearer it became that this case was far more complex and dangerous than they had anticipated. As the investigation entered a critical phase, Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway began to realize that darker, deeper secrets lay behind Maria Grayson's death than they had initially thought. The evidence they gathered suggested that this was not just an act of violence, but the result of intertwined motives and intrigues involving multiple individuals who had previously appeared above reproach. The first major breakthrough came when Allison stumbled upon an old folder of documents related to St. Mark's Church. Among many seemingly insignificant papers, she found several letters dated over a decade earlier addressed to Father Daniel. These letters were written by a woman who referred to a grave mistake and an unforgivable sin they had committed together. Allison realized these letters might be linked to an event that occurred before Father Daniel's transfer to Ashford. At the same time, Mark, conducting a parallel investigation, uncovered another critical piece of evidence: a hidden birth certificate from the hospital's archives. It confirmed that Father Daniel had a child born out of wedlock. This fact had been carefully concealed, but its revelation made it clear that this secret could be a strong motive for murder. Perhaps Maria had uncovered it, putting her in danger. Meanwhile, the church's financial records continued to expose new secrets. The money transferred into Father Daniel's personal accounts had been used to finance the construction of a private home in another state. Investigations revealed that this house belonged to the same woman who had written the letters to the priest. This discovery indicated that Father Daniel had maintained contact with the woman for years and had likely been trying to hide his connection to his illegitimate child. All of this forced Allison and Mark to reconsider their initial assumptions. They began to suspect that Maria's murder might be part of a larger conspiracy. Not only Father Daniel, but others associated with the church could have had motives to eliminate Maria, who may have uncovered these secrets. Allison decided to speak again with Amelia Ross, the church secretary. Amelia was one of the few people who might have access to the hidden truths in the church's archives. During the interrogation, Amelia admitted that she had long suspected Father Daniel of hiding significant connections. However, she had been afraid to speak out, as her position depended on the priest, and she feared losing both her job and the respect of the community. Amelia also revealed that in recent months, Maria had been asking many questions about the church's finances and how its money was being used. She seemed to know, or at least suspect, something important, but hadn't shared her thoughts. Amelia recalled that just days before her death, Maria had come to her, visibly distressed, and mentioned that she needed to speak with Father Daniel about something urgent. While she didn't specify what it was, the encounter had left Amelia uneasy. With each new discovery, Allison and Mark realized they were uncovering threads of a much larger web of secrets, deceit, and betrayal. What had initially seemed like a straightforward murder investigation now pointed to a tangled conspiracy where multiple individuals might have had a stake in silencing Maria. The detectives knew that unraveling this web would be the only way to uncover the truth behind her death. Another crucial detail emerged when Amelia revealed that she had seen an unknown man leaving the church on the day Maria was killed. He was dressed in black and seemed to be trying to avoid drawing attention. At the time, Amelia hadn't thought much of it, but now the memory seemed extremely significant. Allison and Mark began to suspect that this man might be the third person Maria mentioned in her diary. They decided to review the surveillance cameras around the church to try to identify him. In one of the recordings, they captured the silhouette of a man entering the church on the night of the murder. While his face was obscured, his cautious movements suggested he was aware he could be watched. The detectives started to theorize that this man might be a hitman, or someone following Father Daniel's orders. It seemed possible that the priest, fearing his secrets would be exposed, decided to remove Maria from the equation, but didn't want to carry out the act himself. This hypothesis explained many of the contradictions in the case, but there still wasn't enough evidence to prove it. Determined to find answers, Allison and Mark decided to interrogate Father Daniel again. They suspected he was hiding something critical, but weren't sure how to extract a confession. Their plan was to use the conflicting evidence and recent discoveries to corner him into revealing the truth. Meanwhile, a new wave of rumors and speculation began to spread through Ashford. The townspeople were beginning to realize that Maria Greyson's murder was only the tip of the iceberg. It was becoming clear that their quiet town harbored far more secrets than they could have imagined. Trust had eroded, and fear grew with each passing day. Allison and Mark knew they had to act quickly. They felt certain that someone else could be in danger, and that the killer, or their accomplice, might strike again if they sensed their secrets were about to be exposed. The investigation was reaching its climax. Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway understood they needed to make a final push to tie up all loose ends and find evidence that would lead to the murderer's capture. Tensions in Ashford were at an all-time high. Rumors and fears had seeped into every corner of the town. People were afraid to talk, yet everyone wanted to know the truth about what had happened on that fateful night. After long days and nights of analyzing evidence and conducting interviews, Allison and Mark returned to the key unanswered questions. What was the true relationship between Maria and Father Daniel? Who was the mysterious man seen outside the church on the night of the murder? And what did Maria know that made her a target? Following her intuition, Allison reviewed the surveillance footage once more. This time, she found a recording showing the mysterious man meeting with Father Daniel at the back of the church hours before Maria was murdered. They talked for a long time, and though the footage had no audio, their gestures made it clear that the conversation was tense. This moment was decisive for Allison and Mark. It confirmed that the priest not only knew the man, but might have been complicit in his actions. At the same time, Mark continued investigating Father Daniel's financial and banking records. He discovered a series of transactions involving large sums of money transferred to an account registered under the name Stephen Fletcher. The name didn't initially ring a bell, but further investigation revealed that Fletcher was a private investigator with a shady reputation, known for handling dirty jobs for clients who wanted to remain in the shadows. Allison realized that Stephen Fletcher could be the same man who had been at the church on the night of the murder. All signs pointed to Father Daniel having hired Fletcher to intimidate Maria and silence her. The detectives knew their next step was to find Fletcher and get him to talk. They began investigating his possible whereabouts, and soon their efforts paid off. Fletcher was located at a small motel on the outskirts of a nearby city. Allison and Mark wasted no time and headed to the location. Their goal was not only to apprehend Fletcher, but also to make him confess to his involvement in the murder. When they arrived, Fletcher attempted to flee but was quickly captured after a brief pursuit. Under the pressure of the evidence, Fletcher started to talk. He admitted that Father Daniel had indeed hired him to intimidate Maria and keep her quiet. However, things escalated when Maria, realizing her life was in danger, tried to escape. In a moment of panic, Fletcher killed her. Fletcher also confessed that Father Daniel had been convinced Maria had discovered his illegitimate child and the illegal financial dealings he was involved in. The priest feared that Maria was about to expose everything to the public, and this fear had driven him to take desperate measures. With Fletcher's confession, Allison and Mark had the missing pieces to unravel the mystery. They now had the evidence to link Father Daniel and Fletcher to Maria's murder and the motives behind it. But they also knew the revelations would forever change the quiet town of Ashford. This could have completely ruined Father Daniel's career and reputation, so he decided to take extreme measures. Allison and Mark knew they now had everything they needed to arrest Father Daniel. They immediately returned to Ashford to fulfill their duty. The arrest was carried out without incident. The priest offered no resistance, but his face expressed something beyond fear. It was the realization that the carefully constructed world he had built had collapsed. As news of his arrest spread throughout the city, Ashford was engulfed by a sense of shock and disbelief. People who had long believed in Father Daniel's sanctity now had to face the bitter truth. Many could not fathom that the person they had entrusted their souls to was capable of such an atrocity. Only one critical step remained: the trial. Father Daniel McKinnon's case would be an event that forever changed the life of the city. Allison and Mark knew they still had much work ahead, but they felt a sense of closure. They had finally unraveled the intricate web of lies and betrayals that led to Maria Greison's murder. Father Daniel McKinnon's trial divided Ashford into two camps. Some residents could not believe in his guilt until the very end, while others felt justice had finally been served. Regardless of opinion, the trial was a test for everyone and a transformative experience for the city. The courtroom hearings were tense. Prosecutors presented an overwhelming amount of evidence, including the testimony of Stephen Fletcher, who, despite his own involvement, became a key witness for the prosecution. He detailed how Father Daniel had planned Maria's murder in an attempt to hide his past sins and prevent them from coming to light. Evidence of financial fraud and the existence of an illegitimate child only strengthened the case against him. From the start of the trial, Father Daniel maintained a somber silence. Only once, when his lawyer tried to portray him as a victim of circumstance, did he rise to say he was willing to accept his fate. This confession was brief and dry, devoid of remorse or regret. Perhaps he understood that his life was already ruined and that further excuses would be futile. After weeks of hearings, the jury delivered its verdict. Father Daniel was found guilty on all charges. The sentence was severe: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This verdict closed a chapter that had shocked the entire city. Many residents, especially those who had believed in the priest's innocence, were left stunned. But the truth proved stronger than their faith. Allison Harper and Mark Raway, who had worked tirelessly to solve the case, were finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. However, along with a sense of accomplishment came the realization of how much this investigation had affected them personally. Allison, who had always prided herself on being objective and professional, realized that sometimes the truth is too painful to bear. Mark, for his part, was deeply moved by how easily trust and faith could be shattered. The town of Ashford also changed after the trial. St. Mark's Church, once the heart of the city, became empty and abandoned. Many parishioners stopped attending services, and those who remained felt betrayed and hollow. The community, once united, was now divided between those trying to forget what had happened and those who could not let go of the painful memories. Lisa Carter, Maria's best friend, was also deeply affected by the incident. She could not forgive herself for failing to see the evil in the priest, even when all the evidence pointed to his guilt. The loss of Maria and the collapse of her faith in someone she trusted became an unbearable burden. Lisa left Ashford a few months after the trial, hoping to start a new life far from the shadows of her past. Amelia Ross, the church secretary, remained in the city, but her life was forever changed. Her involvement in the investigation and its aftermath made her a pariah among the remaining parishioners, who viewed her as partly responsible for the downfall of their spiritual leader. However, Amelia felt relief knowing that the truth had finally come to light, even though it had come at great personal cost. John Miller, the local journalist who followed the trial from the beginning, wrote a series of articles analyzing every aspect of the case. His reports became popular not only in Ashford but beyond its borders. In them, he posed questions about how people can turn a blind eye to the truth when it contradicts their beliefs. It was a time of change for Ashford. A town once proud of its peaceful and religious character now faced the need to reassess its values. People began to think more critically about whom they chose as leaders and whom they trusted. The recovery process was long and difficult, but little by little, the town began to heal its wounds. For Allison and Mark, the case was a lesson they would never forget. They continued their work, but approached each new case with even greater caution, knowing that behind every lie could be far more hidden than it seemed at first glance. The story of Maria Grayson, Father Daniel McKinnon, and the town of Ashford had ended, but its consequences would be felt for a long time. Not only did the tragedy remain in people's memories, but it also left an important lesson: that evil can hide in the most unexpected places, and that the truth, no matter how bitter, must always be uncovered and acknowledged. Interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. What sentence would you have given? Leave me a comment and I'll read it. Enjoy life, because you only live once. Yours truly.